Is that far from there?
Yeah. How you doing, Judy?
Okay, but I can't see. I can see you're a white man with no hair, and that's all I can tell.
I'm a white man with no hair.
Who is it?
It's a trademark. Yeah, it's a bar.
Oh, okay.
How are you?
Other than blind, I'm fine.
You told me to vote on minutes.
It's one of my favorite pastimes to do.
I know, I'm like trying to.
Jeez. Mark was gonna show us how to do it, like, we need to have like a tutorial.
Actually, no, I did it this morning and I got it to work.
It's
I was like, how did they do it? I spent like 3 minutes. And
one of those magical things.
it was only in that moment.
I bought an Apple iMac back in February because the guy at Micro Center said it had good accessibility features. Then I bought a book, iMac for Dummies. I can't read the damn book because of my visual problems, and I've still not turned the computer on. I'm trying to find someone I can pay to come and tutor me. Otherwise, by the time I get turned on, it'll be moldy.
We could make a lot of money doing that on the side.
You know anyone who does?
Just the few people that work at Apple.
It's stuck on the one.
They go there.
My problem, past experience with people who are really proficient is they can't speak my language. That's a real problem.
I need the most basic terms.
Yeah.
Know how to do it.
Don't tell me to press the start button. Tell me to push the green button.
One in the corner.
Gadgets in my kitchen now have colored buttons because I can't see them. The microwave, green is start, red is stop, and brown is this is through. So if I can find three, then I can find the rest by feel. Okay, I'm managing. Good, Kurt, all over me, Kurt. Could be worse.
3 o'clock.
Well, let's call this meeting to order. This is the East Franklinton Review Board on Wednesday, whatever the date is, November 22nd, 2021. Has everybody had a chance to read the minutes? Anyone
Yes.
want to make a motion? I'll call the roll first. I'm hearing this and see all the damn steam on my glasses. Okay, roll call.
Dr. Box,
Here,
Fergus, Manfreds,
Say yes.
here.
Here.
Present. Mr. Overly? Here. Mr. Samansky? Present. Mr. Webb?
Present.
We have a quorum.
I presume everybody's read the little blurb about masks and distancing and whatnot. I'd like to read that to you. Approval of the minutes. Corrections or changes? Motion,
Second.
all in favor? Roll again.
Dr. Box,
Yes.
Mr. Manfreds,
Approved.
Mr. Overly,
Approved.
Mr. Samansky,
Approved.
Mr. Webb.
Approved.
Motion carries.
We have one conceptual application here, EF-21-11-001 for 501 West Broad Street. Jessica Sheridan is the applicant. And if you're ready, we'll hear from you.
I'm going to recuse myself.
Who do we have testifying? Jessica and who else?
Yes, Mike Siriano.
Okay, do each of you swear to or swear or affirm that what you're about to say is the truth and whole truth to the best of your ability?
Yes.
Here.
Go ahead. Rick, you want to be sworn in? Do you swear on the phone to behave yourself?
Yes. thank you. Rubber match Rex.
Okay.
Are we going first, or do you want to give a summary? I know we've done it different ways.
Yeah, I'll read the staff report and then, sorry, I couldn't find a clicker for the PowerPoint, so, I can just go through the materials on screen.
That sounds good. And then I actually did print out the visuals because I wasn't sure what the setup would be.
Yeah.
So I
Thank
can
you.
hand them out too.
Okay, I will go through this and hand it over. Okay, we're doing a, conceptual review for Gravity 3, bounded by West Broad Street to the north, McDowell Street to the east, multifamily residential structures fronting State Street to the south, and May Avenue to the west. Applicant is requesting conceptual review of the Gravity 3 mixed-use development located within the West Broad Street subdistrict. Project would redevelop about 2 acres of currently commercial uses bounded by West Broad Street to the north, McDowell to the east, multifamily fronting State to the south, and May to the west. Current conceptual development plan includes the following: a 7-story mixed-use building, primarily consisting of a 5-story multi-family residential building built above 2 stories of podium parking. Integrated within the site is a 2-story leasing and amenity space on the northwest corner of the site and Broad and May, building that was already constructed, and a ground floor retail commercial storefront on the northeast corner of the site at Broad and McDowell. The existing AD Farrow buildings at 479 to 491 West Broad Street would be demolished. And extensive landscaping as both parking structure screening and design features of the building. Total counts, 3,600 square feet retail and commercial space, 320 residential units, and 360 parking spaces. Submittal includes conceptual site plan, floor plans, elevations, and renderings. The proposal is generally consistent with recommendations of the East Franklinton Creative Community District Plan. The plan recommends larger mixed-use development and higher density buildings be adjacent to West Broad Street. The proposal is consistent with these guidelines. The proposed plan also recommends building elevations exceeding 50 foot in width, consider using vertical elements, that existing alley grids be maintained, and the inclusion of publicly accessible open space on the ground floor. Staff note the presence of vertical piers and landscaping and screening of the parking structure along the east and west elevations, and recommend additional design treatments to provide relief at street level along McDowell and May. May include moving residential units to the ground floor to wrap the parking structure, or extending materials to grade in some locations. Staff also note the vacation of the alley between McDowell and May, as well as the absence of ground floor open space. Proposed height of 7 stories is also inconsistent with plan recommendations. However, staff consider the height compatible with the nearby Gravity 1 and 2 structures and is therefore supported. Lastly, the plan recommends historic and contributing buildings be preserved and incorporated into new development to the extent possible. Although the existing structures at 479 and 491 West Broad Street are greater than 50 years old, they are not considered contributing structures. Staff, however, encourage the existing building at the corner of West Broad and McDowell to be reused and incorporated into the design to further integrate new construction with the existing fabric of the West Broad streetscape, provide additional relief along the McDowell Street elevation, and to wrap retail uses around the corner of the site for further activation of the street. Staff recommend the following design modifications: include the inclusion of a ground floor publicly accessible open space, inclusion of street trees along all frontages as appropriate. I realize I have that's listed again down here, but info on existing street trees as well. Consideration of more vertical relief along the east and west elevations. Encourage the incorporation of the existing building at the corner of West Broad and McDowell into the design. Consideration of ground floor residential units or usable space to wrap the parking structure. The inclusion of a more prominent entrance on the May Avenue elevation. And additional information on how the proposal relates to the neighboring developments to the south. It's conceptual application, so staff has no recommendation at this time.
All right. May I hand these out there just in case you want to flip through them?
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. I know it's a short week, so thank you for the time. We're excited to present what we're calling Greenhouse at Gravity. It's the third phase of our gravity project here in Franklinton. And as Mark mentioned, we're presenting conceptually, so we're not asking for a vote today. Greenhouse as a brand is centered on and inspired by the natural world and all the wellness that comes with it. So it will be rich with greenery and natural elements, and will include amenities that enhance the greenhouse vision and experience, such as saunas, treatment rooms, hot tubs, cold plunges. So a little departure from the Gravity brand, which was a little bit more of experiential and transcendental and bright colors. We're switching more to like a green and natural feel here, but we still feel like it's a great complement to the Gravity community. As Mark mentioned, Greenhouse will include plus or minus 320 residential units, 3,600 square feet of retail or commercial along Broad, 9,000 square feet of interior amenity in an existing building at Broad and May, an exterior rooftop, courtyard amenities, a 360 plus or minus stall secure garage for our residents. The project will be 5 stories of wood over 2 stories of podium parking. We also plan to include some interactive elements, interactive art, sculptural elements throughout the project, as you can see in some of these renderings, as well as pedestrian-facing seating elements, greenery. There's we're working on either a dog park or a pocket park on the south west portion of the site. And so we're really taking into consideration some of these additional elements that make it a great neighborhood experience. So I will hand it over to Mike to walk through the design. He's with MBBJ, and we then can answer any questions.
So thanks, everyone. So like just reiterating what Jessica stated, we're really excited to kind of continue some of the work that we've been able to partner on relative to the concepts and the architecture relative to this zone in Franklinton. We are, I think, with each iteration, so we've been able to work on Gravity 1, we've been able to work on Gravity 2, and now Gravity, Greenhouse at Gravity. And I think one of the things that, as we've kind of looked at this, is we've always talked about the conceptual and the contextual richness of the area and of this part of the city, how it relates to downtown, how it becomes its own, how it creates its own kind of atmosphere. And I think this wants to be a real continuation of that. I think one of the things that distinguishes this from maybe the previous 2 phases is that, as Jessica mentioned, going towards something that looks and feels more naturalistic and maybe has a softer element to it in terms of the materiality. We started to explore that a little bit on the 12-story tower with the high performance concrete panels at the exterior. And I think we're looking at translating that aesthetic and that materiality in a different way to this site. And so one of the things that, as we were kind of looking at the project overall, and you can see from this axon, is the relationship of the 12-story tower relative to the Murphy building, and then across McDowell to this portion. And in some ways, there's a mirror of that street of McDowell to what we're seeing on our block. And obviously, Broad Street is one of our city's main thoroughfares. And so really considering what the difference is between that street and our 2 flanking north-south streets in May and McDowell, we were trying to consider that as we started to lay out this plan in particular. So we initially noted, just because the new portion of the 80 Farrow building is a newer building with a really robust concrete structure, we knew we wanted to make that something that was a highlight at the corner. And so we talked initially about how to get that to, if you could back up just a slide, how we could think about that relative to Broad Street and how the planning could extend and use that as an element that supported whether it was community, some kind of amenity. And so we've really tried to leverage that portion in that corner as a way to organize the program in that way. So that ends up becoming this kind of special moment in the project that will serve as almost as a front door. The plan then has two courtyards, both a north and a south. Those relate to the top of that amenity space and link to it, both physically on top. And then we obviously create that gap at the corner as you get to the massing of the building. So we really try to highlight that architecturally. The plan, project, it really is fundamentally a residential project on top of a podium with retail at Broad. You can go to the next slide. And these start to indicate that basic organization. So you can see the retail at Broad wrapping the corner. I think we're at 9,000-ish square feet, somewhere in there.
The retail?
Yes,
We're at 3,600.
3,600, sorry.
9,000 is the other building.
Oh, no, okay. And then, and you can see the parking behind. So, we are architecturally and from a, planning standpoint, trying to understand the best way to, number one, park the program adequately, but then also create some life on the street. And so that's been a real focus as well in terms of how we can get that McDowell elevation to partner with Gravity 2 in terms of creating this really pedestrian-oriented type of street. So if we go to the next slide, as we start to think about expression of materials, I mentioned the kind of focus on this corner piece as almost a front door. And given there's some really great spaces on the inside in terms of the raw kind of nature of the structure, which I think complements the rest of Gravity really well. And in talking with Jessica and Brett and Hoffman, they really wanted this to feel, have that kind of naturalistic element. So I think as a design element, we really want to investigate what a living wall looks like. Not too dissimilar from what's happening across the street at Gravity 1, but really aiming to tie it in, but also seeing what, since we've done that wall, we've also learned a little bit of things. So how we get this to function in a way for our climate that supports kind of this real, soft living element that's on the street. Additionally, we'll carry that some of that language to the east over and in front of the retail. So we're aiming to kind of create some kind of relief off the street on Broad with that retail element. You can see that kind of that colonnade that kind of creates some depth on the street and some space. And then that turns to wraps the corner down McDowell here. And so I know there were some comments around the verticality, breaking up the length of the building. Obviously, this doesn't go the entirety of the block. We do have the Homeport project to our south. But some of the things that we aim to do are use we have portions of the project where we naturally come down to ground with either stair towers or lobbies, et cetera, that serve the residential. But then there are also some natural breaks where the retail starts and stops around that corner. And then we also are trying to, as a design element, we're using the balconies up above as this really lively way. They all exist kind of outboard of the plane of the building. So they wrap and come down and meet the street. You can see those precast elements. I can't circle it, but they're the balcony shape and form come down and they actually stem to create some vertical relief along those facades. Yeah, that's it right there. You can see that's indicative of every kind of unit and balcony, we'll call it kind of pod, as it works its way down McDowell. That coupled with street trees, the way that that kind of path is oriented, and some breaks in terms of where the lobbies and stair towers hit the ground, we think will offer a considerable amount of relief as you work your way down the street. So really aiming to make this a pedestrian element. We've also talked with Hoffman a little bit about this image specifically. Might there be an opportunity for some kind of projective art piece that activates this facade at night differently than it does in the day? And so thinking about where that might be, where it makes the most sense. But ultimately, we want to create a rich texture on this on the facade of the building, certainly, but especially on this street, and really leveraging some different materials that are at our disposal. In this height of building, we weren't able to use some of these on the taller 12-story building just because it requires a different kind of mentality around what that facade what we make it out of. So this one, I think we have a little bit more latitude in exploring some different facade options. So we can continue. This is just a kind of planar view of, or more elevational view across Broad Street toward the front. You can kind of see those balcony, those elements. We're also connecting those horizontal balconies with a either a vertical batten screen. That the intention is we've been looking at different like grow medium or different ways to kind of activate those as again as kind of green textural elements. You go to the next slide. This is kind of a more detailed version of one or blow up of one of those facades. You can see that we're really looking at a mesh, kind of metal mesh for railings. And then you can see just a pretty rigid window, creating some economy with the sizes of the windows and openings, but really the balconies and those vertical elements are going to be the stronger read of the facade. But so we're trying to keep that backdrop or that field facade a little quieter. And then another view at the McDowell Broad corner. And then a view on top of the existing building. We've also been exploring a glazed terracotta, some kind of art sculptural wall that isn't necessarily figural, but has some kind of an element that reflects some of the patterning that we see in and around the Gravity campus. So some suggested materials. We are looking at different variations on, we are, in terms of a type 5 construction, we are, we have to have non-combustible materials. So we're looking at different skin systems that reflect and kind of show that warmth. Wood look is kind of what we're going for. So we've looked at some aluminum products, we've looked at some cementitious products, but overall trying to imbue that color. You'll notice across the Gravity campus, we've got some very monochromatic, black, gray, white buildings. We've also got in the tower some warmer, more earthy types of materials. And I think that's what we're going for here. So you'll see some 410 panels, green wall, living wall, and those wood type panels. And just elevation is kind of reflects what I was noting before. You can see those vertical elements as they kind of march up and through the building in the north-south direction, as well as some of the east-west. That's might be the end of it.
Yep, I think that is. The appendix just has some inspirational images of what the interiors might look like. Those are from a project here in the short north, also a greenhouse project. So while we haven't really gotten into that design yet, we wanted to be able to provide a sense of what might go there, what that feeling might be, and then some images of the interactive art that we've been exploring and how that might work and how it's worked in other installations.
I should note that for the podium, as we, our team has been looking at different things that, or different plant material that we know would, be good for our climate. We've looked at bamboo. We know that number one it can, grow to be pretty dense and also pretty tall. And we think something that would complement the aesthetic, I think that Kaufman's going for here.
Where are you talking about that?
So that would be at the podium level where you see the balconies kind of come down. We're looking at structured planter boxes. Right now they're shown as Corten in the images, and those actually would have those vertical elements. And then between those things, we've also been looking at trees as well. So the streetscape and those vertical pieces would kind of complement and offset one another.
Would that be the idea of kind of headlight obfuscation or screening?
Yeah.
Would be the bamboo?
Yes.
I mean, I really like the idea of having a lot of greenery around there. I think my biggest concern with that would be that it would open with nothing, and with the expectation that in 3 to 5 years things would grow, and for 3 to 5 years, if things grew, there'd be no screening and things would look pretty barren.
Sure.
I guess the same with kind of your screening walls that come down in between balconies. Whether there's irrigation involved or whether that is part of the actual construction process where things are installed as a living wall as opposed to planted and fingers crossed that things grow. I think that makes them, if you were to strip all of the greenery off of these renderings, it's a totally different building. And I would be really hesitant to approve something or feel bad if I approved something and then when it was built, there was no greenery on day one and we were just kind of hoping for greenery.
I can go. We've had a lot of the same conversations because I think Brad's expectations are what he's seeing. And so we've talked about, Faux has come a long way. And we've talked to vendors about them for systems elsewhere. We've also talked about preserve because that's the other thing with these, the greenery growing, especially on the balconies, like we're not going to rely on our residents to maintain that. They'll all die. We all know how that goes. So what's the system that's going to look lush, but not, absurd in the middle of winter? And so my sense is we'd be leaning towards like a faux or preserved product, knowing it's more upfront costs, but that the maintenance of it, the look of it will be what we want to achieve day one, because that is a completely fair point.
I mean, for me, beyond the greenery aspect, which I think is important, and you're kind of addressing it as it could be a hybrid. I think it's more a planning issue for me. The thought that May and McDowell streets are really, I mean, outside of greenery, they're going to be devoid of street life. It's a planning issue with getting the amount of parking that you need. I understand the podium and you've got the courts in the middle, but there is no street life to this scheme as it's presented. And I think you have a model across the street, which was part of Gravity 2.0, which sort of addressed that. Like, yeah, we can skin the parking garages with a different apartment typology that could, form the base of this thing. We don't have to rely on a kind of landscaping, screening of that.
To that point as well, where do you intend the main entrance to the building to be? And also is the retail area, the new building of Harley Davidson, is that a separate space for a commercial that has the roof, that has the pool in the roof, or is that part of the building and the main entrance?
Yep. So the main entrance will be midway down McDowell. And I think if you turn to page 3 and what I handed out, you can see this addresses that, and you can also see how we've worked to address some of Bart's comments, and I'll jump back to that here in a minute. The existing building at Broad and May, so the newer AD Farrow building, will be a resident amenity. It'll also be our leasing office. It will connect into the existing building, so residents won't have to go outside to get into the amenity to go to the gym, for instance. And then there will be the entry off of Broad directly into the retail or commercial space as well. So our primary entrance for residents will be along McDowell, or maybe you're a resident, you work at Gravity Phase 2 or park at Gravity Phase 1, but otherwise, most of them are going to be parking in the garage, and then there's 3 or 4 different points of access from the garage up to the units as well.
So there's no actual commercial space on the property.
There is retail, or it's going to go commercial one way or the other along Broad Street.
It's at
In the other area here with the glass?
Yeah, correct. Yep. Yeah, the east half of Broad.
It's that lower, longer piece that sits in front of the building.
Yeah.
And then, hear ya loud and clear, Bart, 100%. And that's something we've discussed a lot in terms of what is going to make McDowell special and what is going to make it this activated and energetic street. And we think that we've actually push the building back like 4 to 5 feet, depending on the side of May and McDowell from the property line so that we can create some interest and some activation. We really looked at the East Franklinton plan. We know that Town and Rich are big streets, and Broad and McDowell obviously become even more of a focus with the growth of Franklinton. And we want to create this north-south thoroughfare to each of those that's pedestrian friendly. So that's where we've really talked about, do we have public seating within those 4 or 5 feet? Obviously, we've talked plantings. It's important to the focus of greenhouse. It's important to having it be a pedestrian element. We've really looked at where entrances and art and interactive art and sculptures interact with Gravity Phase 2, and how those complement one another. There is something we've really started preliminarily discussing internally, but we haven't really run it to ground yet. But could there be the south between Homeport and Gravity Phase 2? Could there be a pedestrian access route through there that's well lit, that maybe has a painted ground plane that has some other interaction too? And then at the southwest corner behind our building, there's some land before you get to the project that's on the National Register, and that we are looking at making a pocket park, maybe an element for neighborhood dogs. So we're kind of working through some of that still, knowing that a little bit of it's going to have transformers, or it's going to have some site utility, but we definitely want to put something there that's of interest, and hear that feedback about interaction on the pedestrian level.
Question, is this the Broad Street view?
Yes.
Correct.
Sorry, I can't read
Yes.
it at the print. If that's your commercial hiding behind your green wall,
Yes.
so if I want to put a restaurant in there, my customers won't be able to find me.
Yeah, so we've talked about the two, and this is conceptual at this point. And what we'll do when we get into it is we'll work with our brokers that we've worked with at Gravity Phase 1 and now at Gravity Phase 2, and discuss with them, is this the right look? Can we do the greenery with maybe without the elements coming down? So we're trying to plan for that so that we don't have issues once a tenant's in the building, or it can't get leased, because that would be worse for the neighborhood and for us as well, of course.
Well,
So
anybody paying for Broad Street frontage wants to be seen.
yes, yeah.
You can see the people on that. That is 16-foot high curtain wall.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're zipping down Broad, even at speed limit, it's hard to catch who.
And we'll have signage and all that typical stuff. This is just conceptual at this point, but we will make sure to work with our brokers so that we don't get in a situation where nobody's going to want that space, because that's great space.
Do you have a sense of who your tenants would be?
I wish I did. I can tell you who we'd love it to be. People want a whiskey bar. No, I'm just kidding. I really don't know yet. I'm not getting a good sense, but I can say traction has picked up on leasing overall over the last several months.
Then COVID wiped it.
COVID wiped it, but it's been picking up. People are still looking for spaces. And I think, especially with the growth of Gravity Phase 2, River and Rich, just the natural growth that's happening in Franklinton, that will be a really desirable area.
You have a lot of mouths to feed.
Yeah.
In walking distance.
Yes.
How tight is your parking right now?
So I think based on the new rules, I think if that space goes restaurant, we might be shy 1 or 2 spots, but if it goes retail or office, I think we're actually just right. And that was a lot of kind of what was weighing in on some of these decisions. Unfortunately, we all know you have to park it for residents, but after this meeting, I was planning to speak with Amanda Ford at the city about parking as well.
I was going to possibly propose losing 10 spots and pulling that retail on the first 2 floors in a little bit
Yeah,
to allow for exterior, if it's a restaurant, exterior seating that wouldn't pinch the sidewalk space, but actually feel like it's under your green awnings.
So right now that wall, and that was one of the comments that I was going to make. Dr. Bach, you were asking, that wall is pulled in slightly from, you can see where those vertical elements come down. So depending on how we treated that with the soffit in there or the canopy, that, we would be able to create some depth so that those, if it were a restaurant, if it were outside space, it wouldn't spill into the right of way, which I think is actually a good thing, creating some degree of depth and buffer from the street, because Broad Street's a big street, it's a lot of traffic. So anything that would feel more sheltered, I think, and still be visible, I think would be welcome. And I think overall, what we're trying to do largely on the project is to create some depth. So whether that is in the dimension that we have to the right of way, whether that's in the balconies, or things that actually, keep us from kind of sucking everything to that 6 inches, right at the right of way line, right? It's creating that texture, it's creating that dimension on the street. I think that people recognize intuitively, but don't necessarily.
There's not a lot of pedestrian traffic. There's a lot of pedestrian traffic, but there's going to be quite a bit more in the future. And to not pinch that with restaurant seating and have the restaurant seating
Right.
Yeah.
past
And
that.
I think that's one of the most attractive ideas of the proposal is that you push this back, you create a little depth. I mean, we know that, Broad Street is a very narrow sidewalk corridor. So I think that could be really interesting. I gotta say, it's super interesting to see one of my own projects depicted as a ruin.
It's a remix.
Arata Izasaki would always draw all of his projects as ruins. So I find that kind of like shocking and interesting. I think too, just getting back to the parking issue, the streetscape presence. I mean, what you're, from a planning standpoint, proposing is basically a 7/8 super block. It's like, it is the same all the way around this thing. And then we've got this corner piece. And I feel like there's got to be some more attention paid to the south side of this that, I mean, you're right up against a little townhouse building and, we know there's a home port project that's going to be part of this. I just have some concerns about treating this as a super block, I think you could be more innovative about plugging in different types of housing typology within the scheme and, you're still gonna get the counts that you need from a development standpoint.
I mean, and I get the balance of parking and with the new East Franklinton park, but at the end of the day, I think other part about us, the board, that we have to be consistent, and I'm gonna channel my inner Kim because he's not here. I get the landscape. That doesn't create activity. I mean, we've been very hard, I think, on the Castle project about turn the retail corner.
On McDowell.
On McDowell.
Mhm.
And I mean, Kim more than anyone, turn that corner, we need activity. That it's not just cool screening, it's not just art, it's not just event, it's about activity. And I also, but I weigh also like do people want to live on first floor? I get all that you have to weigh, but I don't think that we as a board, at least I'm speaking, can sit there and say, hey, we pushed these guys and we told them they need to do this, but here we're fine with just screening and art piece and all of that.
McDowell is main and main.
And I'm not one that's it's 100% or nothing. I'm not even saying that, hey, maybe McDowell over May or May, I mean, I understand there has to be services, and I say, I mean, you have the trash, you have that, there, you have to pick and choose. You have a 4-sided building, essentially. There is service-related stuff. Totally get that. But 75% of this is no activity, 80% of it is no activity nodes. And I think that there's a way to, I mean, I'd like to say, when you said that you can get your number of units, I think the unit count's gonna go down. There's no way to achieve that with parking unless you're willing to pay the parking fee and all that. But to get that project on a big block, I'm not opposed to a big block project if it's done right. I don't think that it has to be different types of, it doesn't have to be like it was the townhomes on here. And I mean, there's different ways of doing it. But landscaping and art probably is not gonna cut it.
Could a different way of doing it be retail further down the McDowell? Would you all support that? Or Bart, I know you had mentioned housing. I don't know.
I would support any kind of ground floor activity that is not landscape washing.
And I don't think, and I think your point is it doesn't have to be the entire facade.
Right.
But the two areas on either side, north and south of that main core 10 entrance, if those are little like pocket places that you can walk in and pick up a sandwich and leave, or there's, if one or two of those areas or sprinkled in a couple of those areas have some storefront and are even, 600 square foot places, it's a handful of parking spots, but it gives relief walking down the street, and it will have people in and out much more.
I mean, I didn't even say, I mean,
Okay.
it's splitting up the clubhouse, but I mean, if it was the fitness part over there or something, I mean,
Mhm.
something that creates an activity where people are, that has more of a storefront feel.
But I think that fundamentally, it's back to the planning, like, it's a 2-story parking garage, edge to edge. I mean, you start thinking about like, okay, what if you get the little courtyard things and they're not from floor, what would they're basically 2 to 7, right? Or 3 to 7, something like that. What if they're 5 to 7, and you get a narrower parking structure that can go up higher, that you have single loaded housing, some of it which is ground floor, walk up kind of stuff, and some of it is corridor access right to the parking garage. I mean, I think you could
Let me
make
weigh
it
in
work.
on a little bit. I've been concerned about for a long time. You can't build buildings like this cheap enough for subway. Meanwhile, we've got Franklin Station and Homeport, where I'm concerned those people aren't getting any place they can walk to pick up the sandwich Bart was just talking about. And I don't know if it's even worth it to you to make the little restaurant things that you can walk in and grab a sandwich affordable to the sandwich maker to even be there.
Mhm.
That's just an observation and a concern I have.
It's not totally off base, and we've been talking, we actually have a couple of consultants on, working with us now on retail, because we're learning as we go in commercial space, and we're wanting to kind of learn from the experts, and there's some different models that you can, create to entice smaller operators, maybe a Subway, but also, could just be like a mom and pop sandwich shop to entice them to come to your property. So those are things we are working on, because you're not totally off base on that. They're going elsewhere. Yeah.
A buddy of mine has 4 subways, and he was interested in River and Rich, and he said the rent was 4 times what he could afford.
Right.
I have just one other thought or question. In the staff report, you mentioned that there was no historical significance of the structures. The one that, my understanding at least, the one that is to the far east of the block, not the central building, but the far east one, is like from early 1900s. Has that been discussed with historic preservation?
Yeah, we did talk to Jamie Goodman about that weeks ago. The 2 buildings, I think one was constructed in the 50s,
The central building.
60s. So they were like greater than 50 years old, but they weren't like turn of the century structures. And it was determined they weren't considered contributing. I mean, we would encourage adaptive reuse of a retail storefront like that, particularly that one on the corner.
I mean, this
So
is
that's
just information, but
Yeah.
the central building, I firmly agree with that. I don't think there's anything significant about it, but I would just, I think it's worth like thinking about that the eastern building, and just getting a little more research on that piece.
With that logic, nothing will ever be 100 years old. Barrow's history itself ought to be restored, reserved, reported, saved, highlighted somehow. That's quite a story. It was the biggest Harley Davidson dealership in the country. It might still have been.
Yes, and the original location was down near Athens, I believe.
Yeah, moved up here in 1920 or something.
But we're very friendly still with the former owner, and I know he's producing, I think, a movie of some type. There's some stuff going on there, so we'll talk with him about his comfort level and what he is doing with his own documentation of Harley and A.D. Farrow as well. But that was one of the things we did talk about internally in terms of the existing buildings, and for us, the ceiling heights are pretty low. There isn't great window space. It's just not conducive to like today's retail or leasing. And buildings are for lease currently and nobody's really bit on that. And they
Whiskey
have been
bar,
for lease.
Whiskey bar.
Right, yeah, it's a little,
Yeah.
speakeasy,
Yeah,
but,
I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that I'm like 1000% sold on that building as being historically significant. I think there are other buildings, frankly, within Franklinton that we as a board have approved demolition of that are much sadder, stories.
we did want to maintain that element of frontage on Broad, though. We do think that's important too, so, that's kind of some of the rationale between putting that down on Broad as well.
Yeah, I think that corner we're talking about, that space, I mean, it leads more to it. It's a balance between keeping the old and keeping what can be. I mean, I'm probably more window sides of, hey, let's do something cool there and handle the other issues before trying to say, let's keep this say one building there and design the project around that.
Right.
I mean,
Diminish that
but I do
experience.
agree, Bart, that, I mean, it takes kind of a different look at what happens on those side streets. And my problem is not that it takes up the whole footprint.
Mhm.
It's just that it basically says we've attacked Broad, but the other part will just landscape and,
Mhm. And look, who knows, if we maybe would have bought phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 all together, we might have a completely different project we're looking at. But we hear the concerns, absolutely.
Okay, so if there's no other conversation, let's draw this back to a close.
Well, the only other thing that I wanted to mention is you've got a lot of Core 10, which I think is great. There's pros and cons to Core 10. One is it rusts, and it has a tendency to drip and stain concrete, and stain things that are underneath it. I would want to be really careful with that and making sure that we don't have runoff on sidewalks. And also, the Core 10 is great. I really would probably be hard pressed to approve a fake Core 10.
Okay.
A panel that looks like Core 10 that is not organic and kind of, it's like putting green aluminum gutters on your building to make it look like copper. It just doesn't have the authenticity that I think you'd be looking for here.
Got it. Appreciate that.
Would you all be open to, if it looked like, real Core 10 wouldn't be, wasn't in the cards, I mean, a different type of metal panel, just in terms of that authenticity, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Different.
I think we've approved metal panel elsewhere. I think if it's done well, your other gravity buildings have it with design patterns and other things. The idea of faking something is not something that I really
Like, yeah.
can get around.
Okay. Mhm. Well, thank you.
Or if you're gonna fake it, really fake it. Make it something which is not supposed to look like something else. It's
Sure, yeah.
ceramic panel.
I hear what you're saying.
Could be a little brighter.
Yeah, I mean, doing something really neat there to draw your attention. The Core 10 will certainly get people's attention. It's a really neat organic. You never know how it's going to turn out color wise and finish wise. I love Core 10. It's also not inexpensive.
Right, right.
So don't sell me on this and then come in with
Yep.
a fake Core 10 panel. I probably wouldn't like to get around it.
TJ, that point I'm sure you got, I mean, not a structural engineer, but you spend a lot of time with the balconies and doing that kind of stuff and understanding what makes those balconies cool is they look like they're floating and they're, if they start getting columns and all that design kind of.
And they're finished.
Falls apart.
The intent is that they're cantilevered, because we really want that vertical kind of horizontal, so I think, the column.
This is just my last degree. Yeah, we can't leave it on ours and you can't leave it from 2 angles and they're telling me I need steel beams and I need all this and like, I just,
And they've
But,
got,
yeah.
and in the rendering here, it shows that they've got kind of finishes under the bottom. It's not just pressure treated framing.
Yeah,
It's got some finished detail there that looks thought out.
It looks Broad Street.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, this is one of the main thoroughfares of our fair city, and it is a block from, it is in the new downtown area as downtown is moving,
mhm,
is moving west, so
yeah,
I think it's a great proposal, and I think I'm excited about the possibility of it.
good. We are too. Those details are not lost on us, and we'll continue to work through it before we come back. We'll also be looking at materials as well here in the upcoming weeks, so that we can bring something that has been based in reality, is constructible, is code compliant, et cetera. So we'll make sure we do our homework before we come back on that, but I hear you.
And next time you're back, I think to Bart's point, I'd like to see a southern and eastern facade, or western facade.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be necessarily a rendering, if the renderings are kind of the same around, but I'd like to see how it's being used, because it's adjacent to existing residential properties in the south. And it's adjacent to what I only can assume will be some future development to the west with the open lot that's there, so.
Mhm.
I think knowing kind of what's gonna happen all the way around.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Great.
Okay. You done? Okay. So moving on, we don't have any new business or old business. The agenda is blank, so we're ready for a motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Anybody?
You-
I'm
Motion,
sorry, I can't hear you.
motion to adjourn, I guess.
Okay, we're done.
I don't think second.
Thank you all.
Anybody
Thank you
driving
very
to
much.
Franklinton?
Happy holidays.
Thank you, guys.
Anyone driving to Franklinton?
Judy,
Who's saying that?
I can drive.
Oh, thank you.
I can drive.
Stephanie will be back in December.
Oh, thank you for your help.
Of course.
At the moment, do we know if there's any meeting in December? Oh, yeah.
None that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
Let you know if there's a